Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel on breakthrough brand storytelling. I am so excited that we get to be together and discuss this. We have just an incredible panel, and we've got a lot of great stuff that we get to talk about today. So we're just going to jump right in and get to know our panelists real quick. So each of our panelists will give you a second here to just kind of tell us a little bit about who you are, where you live, how your career started and developed, and a brief overview of what you do now. Marcia, we'll go ahead and let you begin.
Might help if I took myself off mute. Good morning, everyone. I am Marcia Steele-Hoover, and I am coming to you live from my kitchen in Portland, Oregon. I tell you what, I am so happy. This year is actually my 5th symposium. And while I would absolutely love to see you all in person, I'm glad at least we get to have this year's event. It's pretty incredible. And I don't know about you all, but I've just been a little bit starstruck by seeing Lester last night and this morning in the fireside chat. So for those who haven't met me, I've kind of had a wild ride of a career. I won't go into all the details. I'll just say that, you know, I've held a lot of different roles with a number of different titles. But the core of my experience has really been focused on business, brand, and marketing communication strategy. I've kind of gained all that experience in what I call the trifecta of business, where I've worked on the agency side, focused on brand strategy, and I've also worked on the management consulting side, doing go-to-market business strategy, and then also on the client side, focused on marketing communications. So these 3 kind of very different types of industry have given me what I call a 360-degree view of business that has allowed me to propel my career and uniquely differentiate my skill set. So I think that business perspective has also been critical in helping me land a job at Nike, where I have been for the last 11 years. During that time, I've held 7 different roles and 6 different functions, most recently in our enterprise communications team, which I think many companies refer to as corporate communications, where I'm essentially responsible for both internal communications for our 75,000 employees globally, as well as the external media and investor relations communications for our chief financial officer and our chief strategy officer. And that's me.
Great. Thanks so much, Marcia, and we're glad you're with us. Chantell, can you go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be visiting with all of you today. I am hailing today from my office here on the Gonzaga campus with the Gonzaga School of Law. Just a quick shout out. We're very proud of our men's basketball team right now. And of course, our women's basketball team has performed excellently this season. So we are riding high on that. And I can't really speak for all the work that's happening behind the scenes, but a huge shout out to my colleagues and across campus who've been supporting that. Yeah, so I'm a marketing generalist by trade. I work internally most of the time in-house. My prior role before coming to Gonzaga was actually at WSU, and I worked within the student affairs division when I was there for several years. Primarily higher education and nonprofit work is where my purpose lies, and my soul and heart definitely is deeply involved in that work. I'm currently in the process of pursuing my PhD at Gonzaga, so that's just been an exciting journey. And a lot of my research and time is spent really looking at how we communicate within organizations, so internal comms as well as storytelling within that space. And then additionally, thinking about ways that leadership and communication intersect with one another, and how we can tell, and particularly in the context of this panel, how we can tell stories to help support the goals of our organizations and our leaders as we move everyone forward. So I'm excited to be here, excited to learn from all the panelists, and eager to hear all of your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chantell. And Kim, let's go ahead and jump to you.
Kim, you're on mute.
Hi, hi, can you guys hear me? Okay, good. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Kim Brooks, and I live in the greater Seattle area. I work for a company called Optum, which is part of United Health Group. And I started my career actually at Washington State University at the Edward R. Murrow School of Communication, and have a BA in communication. Was part of the advertising program at Washington State. And I've worked in various roles in terms of financial services, healthcare, and technology companies. And I've been currently at Optum for close to 13 years in various roles in the marketing department. My current role, I lead a team in our brand and corporate marketing team around innovation, technology, and analytics in healthcare. Really nice to meet everyone and excited to join today's panel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim. And JoAnna, do I go ahead?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to join you this morning. I am calling in from my home in Kiev, Ukraine. So it is a little bit after 9 o'clock at night here. My journey from the Murrow School started when I graduated in 2003, which seems both a very long time ago and then also yesterday. I started my career actually serving in the United States Peace Corps, and I worked in rural Kenya as a public health volunteer right out of college. Once I returned back to the United States, I started working in the tourism industry in a variety of communications capacities. And I have since that time been working both on B2C and B2B sides of the tourism industry. I was a consumer-facing travel writer for many years, traveled around the world, wrote for a number of glossy magazines that you might be familiar with. I also worked on contract for many industry clients, tour companies, associations of the sort, doing writing, editing, communications, thought leadership development, things like that. And then in October 2019, based on all of the experiences that I had in various communications roles up to that point, I founded my own company, which is called Rooted. And Rooted is a solutions platform at the intersection of sustainable tourism, storytelling, and social impact. And my mission through Rooted is to responsibly document, support, celebrate, and share sustainable travel-related initiatives that prioritize local communities and the planet, and I'm helping other people do the same thing. And a big part of that has to do with responsible storytelling. So thank you for having me here today.
Great, thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Robert, would you mind introducing yourself as well?
Absolutely. I'm Robert Matthews. I'm a 93 grad of WSU with a degree in advertising. My career has taken me in a lot of different places and with a lot of different brands. I think the red thread that connects them all is I've been drawn to what I call passion brands. Brands that go beyond just having customers and really have the ability to earn fans and have fans around the world. Those are the brands that can create pop culture, that are driving waves of change in both marketing and popular culture. And it's been a pretty exciting part of the journey. I started actually in feature film marketing with Walt Disney Studios and did that for a while, and then moved over into experiential marketing, running sales and marketing for Ticketmaster, and then went to the agency side to get some of that experience over time. And then I've spent the past 21 years actually in the gaming industry. About 8.5 years of that at Nintendo, where I ran consumer marketing for the Americas. And then most recently, I just retired from Microsoft, where I was the chief brand officer for Xbox around the world. And so that's been a pretty exciting journey. It's kept me young, and it's really been great to be able to market to millennials and Gen Z and a number of the younger generations. So it's exciting to be here and share some of that insight over the years.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's exciting to get to know each of you and hear of your incredible experience. So I know this is going to be a great panel today as we get to chat and discuss different areas of brand storytelling. I am Ben Pingel, a scholarly assistant professor in the Edward R. Murrow College of Communication, one of the greatest places that I could possibly find myself. And I know that our students are excited today to get to discuss, hear this discussion on brand storytelling. So our format is we're going to cover a series of 5 subjects today, and then we'll take a break at the end of each subject or each topic and be able to answer a question or two from students as we go through this. So as we start the panel today, it's helpful to gain a context of what brand storytelling is and why it's important. Marcia, would you start us off there and include an example or two of some of your favorite projects you've done in this area as you talk about what brand storytelling is?
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. I talk with a lot of students, and I talk with a lot of adults who quite frankly just get a little confused around brand and brand storytelling. And it's something I think is a little bit hard to get your head around. And it's kind of like when people use that term strategy, it's a little bit nebulous. You're like, what does that actually mean? And I think the reality is that brand and brand storytelling are 2 very distinct things, where brand is the experience you have with a product, a company, a service, or even an individual. And then brand storytelling is how that experience comes to life, the actual communication and the execution of that brand. So JoAnna is going to share more in a moment about the variety of tools that we use for brand storytelling. But before we go there, I just wanted to share a little bit more about what we mean when we say that storytelling is how a brand comes to life. And one example I like to use is that of a brand personality. So of an individual, something, and someone that we all know and that we can kind of relate to explain, okay, how do we do this whole thing called brand storytelling? So a person I think of is Taylor Swift. I think that she's an incredible example. And so for all of you out there, think to yourself real quick about how you would describe Taylor Swift as a person. Like, what attributes would you use to describe what you think she represents? Now, my guess is, as you're thinking about this, you're all going to come up with somewhat similar attributes. It might be sweet, relatable, simple, whatever it is. But if we take those attributes, we say to ourselves, how does she bring those to life and how she represents herself to the world? And something you may or may not know is that Taylor Swift is extremely protective of her brand. And she uses the media and social media, quite frankly, as a platform very, very thoughtfully and distinctly to convey her brand in a way that she wants to be received. So if you think about some of those different platforms that she uses, one is Twitter, right? That's where she's connecting with fans. She's creating a conversation and a personal connection with folks. Versus her IG, her Instagram account, that's where she completely builds her brand image. And then you have Facebook, where she uses that to completely promote her music or other causes or companies that she believes in. And if you think about it, she doesn't blast herself out and promote any company out there. Again, those companies have to align with what her beliefs are and what she stands for. So combined, these platforms tell a story about who she is, what she believes in, and what she wants you to think about her. And it works. So that's like an example of an individual. But now let's think about a company and a company's brand and how that comes to life for consumers. And I selfishly have to admit, I'm a little bit partial to one, and that would be, okay, so Nike. So I would like to think that Nike does a great job in storytelling. And in the past year, I mean, we've always been good in storytelling, but in the past year, we've been very vocal about sport having the ability to change the world. And I think that we would all agree that we need a lot of change in the world right now. And that is our purpose. That is Nike's purpose. It's not about selling a shoe. It's not about a piece of clothing. It's about sharing a story about how sport makes a difference in people's lives. So You Can't Stop Us was a campaign that we created at the onset of COVID last March. It was intended to encourage people to play inside and to help people move while social distancing and giving them the tools to do such. And then over last year, we've had a number of additional spots come through, including one in August that you may be familiar with that included a split screen piece with 53 different athletes, 24 sports representing, sharing a message about a better future for all through inclusiveness and perseverance and the power of sport. That was the message. And so we just finished our last campaign, our last installment of that campaign in January, but it continues to be used around the world as this case study in brand storytelling, where again, it's not about a shoe or a jersey, it's about purpose and how the power of sport can change the world. And that's brand storytelling at its finest. So that's Ben, that's how I would kind of explain the intro, maybe some examples of how that can come to life.
I think that was a great overview. I'll just add and build on that. For me, brand storytelling really is broken down into a very simple idea, and it's the why behind the what. And a lot of times you'll find brands spend a lot of time on the what the product is, what their brand is, what they want you to go do. And they don't spend nearly enough time on the why behind it. And it's the why that we connect with as individuals. It's the emotional connection that drives our decisions. And really, if you think about it, logic and rational thought really just helps us justify the way we feel. Rarely will we take an action on something that we don't feel right about. And so it's important for brands to make sure that they're creating that emotional connection with their audience as well. I'll give you a good example of that. Halo is one of our biggest franchise at Xbox. It's a great series around the world. Well, Master Chief is the hero in that series. Well, Master Chief is behind a veil the entire time, a visor and a helmet. You actually have never seen what Master Chief looks like in any of the Halo games. Yet we need to make an emotional connection with audiences and gamers for the character. And so we did a lot of research on what is heroism. And we did this research post 9/11. And it was interesting, we compared it to pre 9/11. And we found that at 9/11, the definition of hero really around the world changed dramatically. Before that, it was about superheroes, superpowers, invincible characters. After that, it became real heroes, firefighters, police officers, first responders. And so we could no longer talk about our hero and have it be the Superman sort of untouchable after that. And so we had to make Master Chief human. And so we gave him flaws. We put him in situations for the first time where he was not invincible. We let you see some of his backstory through campaigns and things. And we created a deeper story and connection to the character in the games that followed that in Halo 4 and 5. And so, you know, that's an example of how you can take the why and understand that, you know, how to deal with that and how to bring that to life. You need to really understand why you're doing it, not just what you're doing.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. That's great. Let's go ahead and move to our second topic, and bringing stories to life. It can be overwhelming for students as we think about, especially when students are new to this area, as we think about ways to bring these stories to life. JoAnna, can you start talking to us here? What strategies and tools you have found effective in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually read a really interesting statistic the other day, and I think this speaks very loudly in the world we live in right now, which consists of more conscious consumers. And that statistic is that 76% of consumers like it when CEOs speak out on issues. And I think one of the things that can feel very scary for brands to do is to not be controversial, to stay in a place of comfort, to not stick your neck out and take a stance on something. But every company is born on a set of values. It's born on a set of a belief system and missions, and that's what makes a company unique. And so what happens sometimes is when companies feel concerned, or brands feel concerned about, putting waves in the water and not wanting to cause any controversy, they fall back on cliched words, they fall back on generic messaging, things that feel safe. They muddle their messaging. And what this means is that these brands have a story that sounds so much like every other story that's out there. There's nothing unique about that story. There's nothing special about that company. Like Robert said, their why is not what's coming forth. It's simply the what. And so, one of the strategies that I think is really important is standing for something and knowing, with conviction what it is your brand is about, and then leaning into that and realizing that might turn some people off, but it's also going to attract the kinds of people that you want to your brand. One of the other things that I think is really important, and I talk to about the clients that I work with, is this idea of going macro. Again, we're often too vague, but the most powerful stories are those that take us to a specific place and a specific person in a specific moment. Like I said, I work in the tourism industry, the travel industry, and so many destinations, for example, are like, well, my destination is great. And I say a destination is not a story. Nobody goes home and says, Paris, I love Paris because it was Paris. They remember Paris because of an activity they did, a specific conversation they had, a meal that they shared with somebody in a certain place. And it's those micro moments that really bring storytelling to life. And so I really encourage my clients to think about the where and the who and the how, and really looking beyond the what. And just a quick note on that, because of the industry I work in, one of the things I'm very aware of, and I'm sure this is true in a lot of industries and a lot of brands, is being very mindful in telling that story, especially when you're bringing other people in to help convey that story, is that we need to avoid extraction and exploitation. You see this a lot, for example, in the nonprofit world, where you have, folks from the global south that are supposed to stand in for like all of Africa, and that's supposed to be a compelling story, but really that's a story of white saviorism and exploitation. We need to be really careful about what we do with the people whose stories that we're using to help tell our overall brand story. So I just want to, put a little flag on that one for you. If you start thinking about how you bring in all the elements of a story, we need to be really mindful of the people. They are people, and they aren't just images, and they aren't just names. And then just one final note on that is really this idea of stories over stats. And if any of you move into the space of sustainability, the climate crisis, or anything like that, you're going to be overwhelmed with statistics. And one of the problems that we're having right now with brands that are trying to work in this kind of space is they're telling stories that are too big and too focused on numbers and not accessible. Stories over stats. People are heart-centered, human-centered. That's where people are connecting. And do be mindful that think about the kinds of stories that matter to you and reflect that in the work that you do as you work in brand storytelling.
I would build on what JoAnna just outlined around, if you were to come onto my team today and we were to go build a story together on our brand, really starting with that outside in perspective and really getting inspiration for there and who you're trying to target and who your brand wants to engage, what matters to them. Really starting with that outside in is the most important part. But you can't forget also what your company is trying to do, what you sell, how you're solving industry problems. So you also need to look at that. And then you've got to pair that messy middle in there. And then what your brand is in terms of what's your logo and your identity, what's your purpose, What do you want people to know you for and understand about your company? You've got to kind of connect all those pieces together. So start from the outside in, connect it from, what you're ultimately doing for the market, what your brand stands for, and kind of figuring out that messy middle is really how you'd start to do, I think, a lot of the things that JoAnna just described. The other point in how to kind of figure out that messy middle, doing research, being resourceful, Google search, become an expert on the topic you're about to build that story on. You're not just going through an exercise to build that story. You really need to get in and entrench yourself in what you're talking about. Speak to subject matter experts in your company, leaders, do the Google research, look at surveys and whatnot, and all that kind of what we call source content, and bring that all together as well. So more tactically speaking on what JoAnna described of how to bring that story to life, outside in, connect it to what you do, and bring all that source content and what your brand stands for in between.
Great, thank you. These are some incredible insights. And I'll admit, when I asked the question, I expected to hear learn how to use Photoshop or learn how to do this marketing software, and we haven't gone there at all. And it's been incredibly enlightening. So thank you. We're going to jump to a question from a student real quick here that I think can tie in really nicely here. The student asked, can you think of any difficulties or hardships that can arise when choosing how to tell the story of a brand? We'll leave that open for you guys to discuss for a second here.
Absolutely. I think I'll jump in. I think this year has shown how difficult it can be for brands to navigate the conversations that exist in popular culture, especially brands that are on the cutting edge of popular culture, like an Xbox or a Nike. They're expected to not just sit by the sidelines and let things happen. They're expected to have a voice and to take a stand. The challenge with that is that if you're not thoughtful and if you're not authentic to what your brand is and the values that you have, you can get into some pretty tough places very quickly. And you saw a lot of brands do that. They launched into making statements and things at various times this past year or two. And a lot of them sort of stepped in the wrong direction because they were motivated more by the moment and making press than they were about their convictions and their authentic values. And that's where brands can really get out of sync. So authenticity and conviction is key, not only for individuals, but really it's key for brands as well.
I would add, Robert, too, it's a very subtle nuance and something that as consumers, we don't think about, but in corporate America, also that challenge can be internal, right? So if you're not consistent in what that brand is in terms of your vision, your mission, your values. So you talked about that, Robert, and I couldn't agree with you more. Those values, you have to stand by those. You have to live and breathe those. Those can't be just lip service that you give to your employees, and yet you say something else, which we know happens a lot in different types of companies. So trying to build consistency and building those brand ambassadors, even within your company, especially if you're a large company with a multinational with many different employees who have different views. What is that common goal? What is that purpose that everyone can rally behind, believe in, stand by, and be ambassadors for when they talk about their company externally?
I will jump in really quick and just add that I think social media has put an incredible pressure on organizations to deliver responsive, valuable content more so than ever before. I think the best example of this is to just think simply about the deadline to submit an advertising to print. Months in advance, if you're looking at a national publication that maybe that's a print magazine or something like that. That used to be the world we lived in, and now there's an expectation that the minute something happens, there's a response And I think we have large organizations, we have large brands that are navigating these spaces, and that isn't necessarily a universal approach across all of North America. Particularly for global brands, there has to be a sensitivity to the geographic nature of where they are and who they're connecting with. So to me, one of those core challenges is just recognizing that how that internal alignment, much like Marcia was talking about, can deeply impact the authenticity through which you can communicate quickly. This tends to be a challenge in higher education. We're very reactive to situations. We maybe don't step back and really consider what the outcome is going to be of a reaction, rather than working behind the scenes and saying, we're acknowledging this as an issue, or we see this as a challenge in our society. How do we want to address this? What kind of work can we be doing internally to tell stories or communicate better? And then prepare for the time that we maybe need to be speaking about this on a more broad-based level. And so I think that requires leadership foresight, to be perfectly honest. It requires people to be thinking about a little bit more than just what we're doing next quarter or the bottom line. And that can be challenging if things are moving along and the world is moving quickly and we have COVID-19, and holy moly, that's put a ton of pressure on all of our teams to deliver. But there's still that desire and that need to be able to establish sort of a set of values that we all are on board with as an organization and that we all believe in, and use that as a tool to sort of springboard off it with some of that storytelling that's occurring and some of that external communication.
I want to jump in just really quick, Chantell, what you just said about that pressure. You just have to be really careful, and every time you're putting your brand out there and to stand for something, you've got to think about the risk, and is it a calculated risk, and is it worth taking? One example that is pretty recent, getting in a lot of publicity right now, is around the Band-Aid brand with their racially inclusive Band-Aids. And they, if you look at the case study behind it, they were quite thoughtful in their approach and how they brought that to market. It seemed their reasoning was a good one, but not everyone is going to react in a positive way when you go to kind of, not saying that they were jumping on the bandwagon, not saying that at all around being inclusive, but you just have to be prepared as well that not everyone is going to accept what you're saying in a positive way. Social media, press can spin things that are meant to be positive and weren't meant to be opportunistic for your brand in a negative way. And you have to be prepared as a marketing and communications organization to respond to that as well.
Yeah, I think that the worst position any brand could ever be in, and just like any individual could ever be in, is to find yourself being reactionary. And as soon as you're reacting to things, you're no longer controlling your destiny. You're no longer on the path that you set out to be on. You are reacting to other things. I call it chasing taillights. And it's never good for a company, a brand, or a person to chase somebody else's taillights. You're always going to find yourself in a tough position that way. And so, it's important for everybody coming out of school and into the workforce to really be planful, to really know where you want to be, what you stand for, what those values are, and work towards those. And don't get distracted and thrown off your path, because there's a lot of things that will do that. And you don't sort of want to be like the dog in the movie Up, where it was always squirrel, squirrel. You want to really be focused on your own path. And so that would be one piece of advice from me.
I would just add, JoAnna, you talked about this earlier too, and that is as corporate brands go to market and tell those stories, being very clear on who your audience is. Because to your point, Robert, if you're reacting to the wrong people, then you're not helping yourself either. If you truly understand who your audience is, what your purpose is, what your story is, then you can talk to them in a meaningful way. And you have to understand the risk associated with perhaps alienating or not agreeing with the general public, because they aren't necessarily your audience and you are never going to please everyone. So just being clear on who that audience is, whether it's an individual, right? Like I said, a Taylor Swift, she really understands who she's targeting, as well as a company like Xbox in a gaming industry and who they're targeting. And then how do they not react, but truly create those stories that are authentic and relevant to that audience.
Great, thank you all. These are some just amazing thoughts. I'm taking notes left and right here, filling up my notepad. So Kim, you had mentioned in our emails some of the differences in approach between business to business and business to consumers. Can you share what you've learned there and a little bit about this growing trend of human to human approach as well?
I sure can. I guess in my current role, I do a lot of B2B, but I've done both sides, business to business, B2B, business to consumer, B2C. And when it comes to storytelling, I think as B2B marketers, oftentimes you're usually selling more technical things to business buyers, not all the time, but a lot of times. So how you think of marketing and supporting the marketing in B2B is often more in like a product marketing mindset, thinking of facts and product features and, results and it's very technical, and how that is promoted in the market might be more around like product sheets and very dry white papers and case studies. And I think as B2B is starting to evolve as a marketing function, they're realizing more powerful stories can be, and common thread.
Looks like Kim's having some technical difficulties.
Ben, I'm happy to respond to if that might be helpful while Kim is working through her technical challenges. That's the beauty of Zoom and not being in person. I think it's always funny to contextualize the B2B or B2C framework within that notion of higher education, because I guess business to consumer, right? That's what we are. But I will say that there is a very human-centric and personal nature to the work that we're doing, and I do support a lot of our recruitment efforts for particularly the law school. And many of you who are students on this call probably know that when you are looking for an institution, you're looking for a place that's going to be your home for a little while. You're looking for a place where you want to build community. You are not just there necessarily for the education in its rawest, most tangible form. You're also looking for, is this the right fit for me? Am I going to thrive here? Is this a place where I can get excited and fit in and be happy? So that requires a lot of very human approach in order to really make that happen. And COVID-19 has created a massive push for a more personal yet digital experience for students as they're looking to come into higher education. So we are really challenged in that, to be able to tell the story of our institution, to be able to share with students their potential experience if they come to us here in Spokane or elsewhere, no matter wherever you are or what you're looking at. And that's, I think, on a tactical level, we're trying the industry in general is just, we're really looking at some of our corporate and colleagues from around the country and saying, what are the things you're doing? What are the technologies you're leveraging to try to create an experience that feels genuine and authentic, but then also can create that personal connection. And so that's just it's a unique way to look at sort of that B2B, B2C type framework. But in my view, I think that the biggest thing, I can't take credit for this idea, this is Seth Godin at his heart, but he talks about how important it is to create connection and how humans connecting with humans is at the root of the work that we're doing. And that is probably the most valuable in terms of building relationships with a brand or building relationships with an organization. And I think that's why well-trained, well-functioning customer service representatives can ultimately be a huge part of your storytelling. It's that same thing with employee onboarding and building those connections where you can. So.
And Chantell, something, we heard that from Lester earlier. We heard it from him last night. We heard it from him this morning in terms of that human connection. And I think that when we think about the brand personality of an individual, you can see that with Lester in terms of that emotional connection that he creates when he does some of those interviews and the importance he puts on that, and then how that comes through in building those relationships and ultimately the story that he's ending with.
Great, thank you. Kim, were you able to get some audio going?
Yes, I figured out there are some Wi-Fi issues going on in my neighborhood. So of course, of today of all days. I guess, I missed some of what others on the panel had mentioned. I just wanted to kind of stress more around that storytelling can be a common element between B2B and B2C, because you're creating memorable moments, rather than an ad or a sales pitch. Like, creating a memorable moment is going to stick with people longer. And you can do that both with a business buyer or, marketing to someone. A business buyer is a human at the end of the day, right? But marketing to someone as something in their consumer life as well, to influence and get the action and the perception across that you're wanting. So at the end of the day, storytelling is a common thread. I believe for both, it doesn't have a place in one or the other, from B2B to B2C. It has a place in both.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a chance to work on predominantly the consumer side, but also at Microsoft, I ran the marketing and the outbound marketing for Surface and Windows, which had a enterprise component to that. And one of the things I pushed back on all the time was this mentality that somehow, when you're an enterprise focused marketer or a business to business focused marketer, that you need to do that differently, or you need to deploy different sort of techniques. The reality is that we are consumers, and we're always consumers. We're just people. We don't magically transform into something else and make decisions differently when we go to work every day. And companies, and especially enterprise-based companies in technology, are realizing that as millennials take the reins and are more of the decision makers and Gen Z behind them, the reality is that those individuals have grown up with consumer-based brands. And those consumer-based brands are the ones that are now making inroads into enterprise and technology for those business-to-business clients. And so, we need to realize that, and we just need to connect with people emotionally, regardless of whether or not they're making decisions for a big company or whether they're making decisions for themselves and their families. We always are making decisions based on our emotions, and marketers need to realize that and make that connection.
Awesome, great. Thank you all so much. These are some great thoughts. Let's take the next few minutes and discuss something that I think is really important in today's society. Chantell, you mentioned in your email that as our organizations work to create more inclusive internal environments and aim to address systematic bias, storytelling can be a powerful tool to create change and bring less engaged audiences on board. I feel this is an important area for us to consider. And so can you speak to that for a minute and share with us your experience, what you've seen in the industry?
Yeah, thank you, Ben, for being willing to add this topic to the panel, because I think it's something that we're all becoming more aware of. We're being asked by our leaders to work more closely with our diversity, equity, and inclusion colleagues, our colleagues in human resources, particularly internal marketing and communications professionals. But I think on an external outreach level too, and external brand marketing and communications and storytelling, much like others on the panel have already mentioned, organizations are being held to a standard of making statements or presenting information about the work that they're doing. I will start out by just saying really bluntly, like, if you aren't actually doing these things, don't say you're doing them. If you're not actually engaged in some diversity, inclusion, and equity work within your organization, putting on a front that says you are is probably going to do more to erode your brand in terms of the overall perception than it would to acknowledge that there's work to do and lay out really concrete solutions and tell stories around those solutions. Another thing I would just share really quickly, and this was something that I was watching a Netflix special, Hannah Gadsby, she's an Australian stand-up comedian, and she has a short show or a short special called Nanette. If you like comedy, I highly recommend it. In that show, she tells a story about her personal experience with trauma. And she said something really critical. She said, we need stories because they create connection. Stories, and these are some of my words, create connection, and they propel us to a deeper, more meaningful conversation. They elevate our work by bringing us closer to the essence of what it means to be a human being. I think it's very hard to approach DE&I work without thinking about the people who are invested and involved with your organization and the kinds of people you want to bring on board. I think that requires some really raw conversations around what is happening in your organization. And I think it requires us as marketing and communications professionals to listen and do so authentically and sit in a space where we can really understand where others are coming from. If we're saying that our organizations are representing these individuals, that we're telling these individuals' stories as a way to illustrate the work that we're doing, I think we need to start by listening. And I think what happens is occasionally organizations like to say, you know what, we need to put out a statement or we need to do some kind of campaign. And the people in the room that make the decisions around that and how that story is framed, how it's told and how it's presented are not the people that actually are the ones that might have the most to contribute. And it becomes sort of this insular type boardroom scenario, which then once the product or the message is out to the world might fall pretty flat and or get a significant amount of pushback for being either tokenizing or tone deaf. So this is a huge challenge for us as communicators, as marketers. We're sitting in spaces where we have to not only understand the people that we're working to uplift and the voices that we're working to bring forward to the table. We also have, all of these other external systems and biases and factors that we have to really look at and consider. And so I really encourage students to think critically about their place as members of an institution that has brought you to a point where you are looking at your next step in your career, what kind of privilege you bring and how you can use that privilege to tell stories for others who maybe don't necessarily have a platform to do so, and push your brand. If you work for a company and you're seeing things that maybe don't align with what the organization is saying they believe, or things that are maybe what you would feel like detrimental to the brand, making note of those, speaking up about those things. Sometimes that gets taken the wrong way. I think some people are a little resistant to hear that. Millennials and Gen Z sort of get pigeonholed into these social justice warrior type tropes. But I do think that the work, like many of you on this panel have already mentioned, the work is really critical to ensuring that we are making decisions that will support our brands well into the future in terms of how we're building an organizational reputation that is inclusive and is representative of the people that work for it.
I would also like to add that I really liked what Chantell said about utilizing the platform that exists with your brand, because I think one of the things we need to be very mindful of when it comes to DEI in particular is the actual terminology that we're using and the actual narrative that we're telling. And one of the things that you heard many brands come out with is this past year is this idea of giving a voice to the voiceless. And that right there is a terminology that actually closes down and continues to silence and marginalize people who have been erased from these boardrooms, for example. People have voices. They just haven't been given the space to use them. And so building on to that, I would just say it's important to understand your privilege, your bias, the perceptions that you bring to the table. And it is essential that somebody else is involved with the storytelling within your company, so that there are multiple perspectives and people who can look at the actual language you're using, the actual photography you're using, the way a message is being communicated, to ensure that it's not actually doing the opposite of what your brand intends to do. There is a big problem with a lot of brands that think they're doing one thing. They have an intention, but then what is put out into the world is actually being interpreted a different way. And so, we need to be really mindful about the actual words we're using, the actual way that we're going about our DEI work. And so that's why it's important that this is built into the entire company structure and it is not just performative.
Fantastic thoughts. Thank you all so much. As we look to wrap up our panel now here, I'd like to spend the rest of our time discussing the actionable skills and capabilities that our students need to succeed. Many of the questions that we've been seeing in the chat have been along these lines of how can we be successful in this field? Robert, you had mentioned in your emails to me how softer skills like creativity, leadership, global perspective, critical thinking, and storytelling are often more important than technical knowledge. Can you speak for a moment with us about your thoughts there?
Absolutely. The reality is that marketing is changing so rapidly. It's impossible to learn everything you need to learn before you leave college about it. In fact, most of the folks that we would hire out of college, to some degree, we would have to deprogram and kind of point them in different directions and kind of share kind of the current state of how things were working in digital or social or e-commerce, or how people were connecting with each other and building communities. I believe that there are brands that create the waves of change and those that ride the waves of change in others. And if you're going to be one that's out there creating waves of change, by definition, you're going to be in uncharted territory all the time, and you're going to be flying without a net. And so you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that's one of the really important skills to develop, is put yourselves in situations where you are not comfortable, that you just don't know what the next step is and things like that, because you're going to find that is going to be your world when you step out into the business world for quite some time. And I hope throughout your entire career, you will find yourself in uncomfortable situations, because that's where learning and growth happens. The other thing is, you can teach a lot of things. You can teach knowledge, you can teach information, you can teach technical skills on how to do something, but it is very, very difficult to teach creativity, to teach abstract thinking, to teach imagination. And that's something that you just need to develop over time by finding yourselves in situations that enable you to exercise those softer skills and build that muscle. And so definitely do that, and don't just sort of focus on the technical knowledge. The final thing I will say is that any technical knowledge and any sort of skill that you develop is going to pale in comparison to the people that you're going to meet throughout your career and the impact that they can have on your career. Every single job that I've ever received was through somebody that I knew or met. I never once got a job by sending in my resume cold to a listing. Never once in my entire career. So I would encourage you to put a bigger emphasis on mentorship. Meet people that you can. Introduce yourself, spend time, volunteer your time, look for stretch projects at your current companies, or when you get into a company. Those are the things, those individuals that you meet along the way are going to be the ones that connect you to the things that are going to be your dream jobs someday. So I can't stress internships and mentorships enough. That had a profound impact on my career and got me the job at Disney, got me the job at Ticketmaster, and ultimately sent me on my way with my career. So that's certainly important.
You know, something I would add to that, Robert, is, and I know this is easier said than done when you're a student, but it's thinking 2 steps ahead and not just 1 step ahead. So I think that everyone who graduates from university is excited for that first role. And I get it, because you have bills to pay and you just want to start your career. But as you grow your career, it's also important to think 2 steps ahead. How will, you know, what do you want your end goal to be? And then how will this one job propel you to the next job? So what you don't want to find yourself is stuck in a place that will not give you what you need in order to get to your ultimate career path. So thinking, it doesn't mean that you have to attain that second role, right? But you need to be able to think 2 steps ahead and say, what are those critical skills? What are those, how can I demonstrate certain things and capabilities in order to get to that end goal? And what does that path look like? So then I'm just not taking one role and I'm stuck there. And then I have to think about, well, where else do I want to go? So then you have some type of path along the way. I would also add around the mentorship and the leadership is, you know, look at those people that are either your mentors or just those people, maybe it's even your professors that you aspire to be like. You like their style, you like how they teach. And leadership is similar to creativity, right? It can't always be taught, but it can be something that you can emulate. And it's done so by looking at those mentors, looking at those professors, looking at those people that you essentially look up to, and you like their style, and you pay attention to it. And then you start to mimic those things, and you see how that works as you're growing your leadership skills. I can't say enough about some of the leaders that I've had in my career. And even to this day, I catch myself and I'm just like, well, what would Shelley do? And it's very important to me to catch myself in the moment to say, what would Shelley do? And to think about how I would approach a problem or a solution or something within my team.
Yeah, one of the things I'll say on leadership is this, that I think a lot of people confuse leadership with control. And they don't believe that they can be a leader unless they have control. The reality is, in today's matrix world, especially in larger corporations, you will never have complete control. You should sort of just get that in your head right now. Everything is a shared decision. Everything is a shared ownership. The way to succeed and the way to lead is through impact and influence. And you can have that on day one when you join a company. You can lead in your teams. You can influence decisions. You do not have to have any sort of managerial control at all to be a good leader. And I will tell you that the ones who come out and they can be a leader and have that kind of impact and influence are the ones that are going to be farther ahead than others. And then the final thing I will say, and this is something that I've seen as a trend, especially with people coming out of college recently, be patient. Be patient. I've had people come into my office after 8 months in a position and say, okay, I've done that. I'm completed. I'm on to the next thing. When's my next role and promotion? And I'm like, you have just begun to scratch the surface of what role you're in. So please be patient. Please throw everything you have into it, and good things will come to you. But don't be a climber right as you get out of college, because I think that can sometimes rub the wrong way and work counter to you.
I know we're almost at time, but I just want to build off of what Robert just said really quickly, because I wish someone would have told me this coming out of college. Don't be a climber and be patient, but in whatever role you take, but especially if you're going to do storytelling and brand, collaboration is key. Having a collaborative personality and mindset is so key. Stay curious, but learn how to communicate in different ways, because it's going to be different how you're communicating up the chain to your peers, and ultimately as you grow to those that will report and look up to you as well. And you've really got to keep that in mind, and that's all a part of collaboration too.
Fantastic. thank you all so much. This has just been a very thought-provoking discussion today that I'm sure has been beneficial for our students. I've learned a lot. So again, thank you to each of our panelists. To everyone here, please keep watching. We have a great afternoon ahead with a lot of great panels. And thank you all for being here today.